the new UI. Why are we doing a new UI? So there's a bunch of reasons for this. And we're sort of coming at it from a number of directions. One direction is that the UI we currently have is a very old UI. We've had it for many years. It's done as well, but it's very Web 1.0, very sort of like simple in what it can do, and that makes it very difficult to extend and add new features. And we get requests for lots of new features, some of which we'd very much like to implement, but there's really either no place to put them in the current UI, or it would be very difficult to change the UI to accommodate them just because of how it's been constructed. Um, so there's a reason to try and to do something else to allow us to support new things. And then there's a sort of another piece of it is to try and provide more information to our operators and our users, because we gather a lot of information now about the state of the node and what services are available and the state of wireless links, and we have nowhere to put it. So we kind of need a larger canvas, if you like, to provide this information to people, to let them make better choices about what they might be trying to do with their nodes and with their networks. And then there's just a general desire to try and put more things front and center for people. Right now, you sort of have to dig around to find things, and a lot of the time you just want to go one place to see out the state of everything, and it all be sort of simple like that. So that's really the sort of three main driving forces behind why we want to approach this redesign. So let me share where we are, or where we started from, perhaps. So hopefully that works. So you can see this, right, Orv?
Yeah, looks good. Go ahead.
Okay. So this is my home node. It's my main home node. And this is our current UI. It's very simple, it's very clear. But it doesn't tell you a lot. But this is what people find when you navigate to someone's node, and it doesn't really tell you a great deal about what's going on. So the first thing we wanted to do is to try and bring a lot more information up front. So if you look at my home node in the new UI, you'll see a lot more information. So this is what it looks like in the new UI. So let me quickly talk about this. Many years ago, one of our developers, a chap called Daryl, started work on a new UI, and his concept, which I think was really good, was to try and bring a lot more information to front and center to what people saw when they visited your node. Today, if you go to a node, let's assume it's not your node. If you want to find out what services that node has, you have to go onto the mesh page. If you want to look at, say, other information about that node, probably you can't, because maybe it's hidden in one of the admin pages, so you can't really sort of investigate that node anymore. We've had various requests where people said, well, wouldn't it be nice if you could see, some information about tunnels on the front page, or information about other configuration aspects on the front page. And of course, that's simply not something we do right now. So we wanted to try and bring a lot more information front and center onto the main page. So if you go to a node, my node in this case, on the network, this is what you'll see. And if you are on the on one of the supernode networks, and you can see this node now. You can go to the URL at the top there, KN6PLV Berkeley, Oxford, LA, Merlin, and this is what you'll find. This is live in my house right now. So, so on the left hand side, You can see basic information about the node, how long it's been up, time, such like information about the network, its location on a little map. On the right-hand side, there's information about more information about the configuration of it, like the radio configuration, what kind of tunnels you have, stuff like that. And then in the center, you've got your services and your local nodes and your neighborhood nodes. So you've got information about what you have in your local area, what you might have in your basement or in your shack or on your tower. And then you've got information about what you're connected to. Now, this is the kind of information you would normally have had to have gone to the mesh page to get. And it's often the information you often want to know when you go and look at someone. It's like, well, okay, I'm at this node now. How is it connected to other nodes? I want to see more. So this is the information you would get on any node. But this is just the information you get if you are browsing as a user. More interestingly is what you can do with the new UI if you are an admin. So we'll dig into that a little bit. So first, top right hand corner, there's a little person icon. We click on that, we can log into this, which I will now do. If I could type my password, it might even be better. Seriously, how many times do I have to get this wrong? Oh, would it help if the caps lock wasn't on, wouldn't it? There we go. I can type. So the first thing to notice is a few things have changed now. Some information we make available to anybody who's browsing your node, but if you're the admin of your node, there's a lot more information that you might want to see. Notice, for example, that now says admin up here rather than it used to say just status, because now you're the admin. We have and a few other things have appeared. There's some internal services here. There's some information about packages here, and also notice as I move my cursor around, X sections are highlighted, and we'll come to what that's all about in a moment. Also, we have these icons on the left hand side, which I haven't really spoken about, but do notice an extra one has appeared at the bottom for tools, which again we'll come to in a moment. Right, but let's start by looking at some of the sort of basics that this does. So the goal of this UI is that everything you need to get to starts here. There aren't lots and lots of pages of stuff you have to sort of run through. Everything you can get to starts on this page. So as you move your cursor around, you'll see certain things highlighting to tell you that you can edit this stuff. So if I click on that one, we drop into a dialog which gives us some of our basic editing stuff, which is basically a dialog which lets us change, in this case, the node names, the description. I can add a few private notes about this node, and set the password. I can change the theme. Basic node configuration stuff. So there's a few things to talk about the sort of general concept, because we'll see this dialogue again and again and again as we look at the other functions that we can do with the UI. But this is the basic construct, is that you find the information on your main screen that you want, and you click on it, and it lets you change it. So just walking around this dialogue a little bit, we'll start with help. So traditionally, we've had like a help icon on many of the pages that would open up a web page, and there'd be some text about to try and help you with what you're doing. Here, we decided we would actually embed the help in the dialogue itself. Most of the time, particularly when you're familiar with this, you don't need any of this stuff. But if you're starting out, this will help you about what the various fields are for, what you can use them for. Also notice at the bottom of the screen, towards the bottom of the screen, I should say, there's a thing called advanced options. Back in the old UI, we used to have this advanced options page, which would have this massive list of stuff you could change all in kind of one place. And a long time ago, someone said to me, well, why don't we have that, next to the stuff it's actually about, rather than just have it off somewhere else? So a lot of these dialogues, as we go through, you'll see that they have an advanced options setting section. And if you click on that, you'll actually see additional options that are either rarely used or things that only sort of, more experienced users might want to use. In this case, the ability to add SSH keys to your device. So let's change something so you can see how things are changed. So right now it says main home node. I'm going to change this to say dim home node, and we'll hit done. Again, this is a sort of general concept with how this UI works. At the top of the screen, you'll see that there's now a new box. It says pending changes. So before, a lot of changes you would make on the node would force you to reboot. A lot of changes would happen as you change, when you basically hit OK, and the node might spend some time reconfiguring itself until it came back. But a lot of the time you want to build up various changes to various things, and then when you're satisfied with all the changes, you want to keep them in one go. So that's what's happening here. As you make changes, the changes are collected by the system, and when you're ready to commit them, you would hit the green commit button. But perhaps, as in this case, I don't want to commit these changes. I just want to get rid of them, in which case I could just hit the revert button and those changes are thrown away. So that allows you, as we go through the UI, perhaps you want to add some LAN device and then add a service for it, collect all these things together, and then when you're ready to commit them, you hit commit, and all these changes are applied in one go. And if you make a mistake, you can just revert them. So those two, the dialog model and then the sort of global commit revert, are the sort of two basic sort of principles of how this entire UI is constructed. So moving on a little bit, we can talk about the time. Here we just have these sort of usual things you might expect. Where our NTP server can be found, how often we update it, what our time zone might be. And again, we can make a change here. We can hit done and then hit commit to accept those changes. An additional thing we can do on some dialogues is that perhaps let's say I went and changed my time zone to somewhere else, and I could just realize at that point that I don't want to make these changes, so I could just hit cancel, and that would just throw the changes for that specific dialogue away. So that lets me, if I'm collecting a lot of changes between different things, and I make a mistake on one dialogue, I could just throw that away and start again without having to throw everything away. So let's talk about firmware updating. So one of the things we wanted to do was to give people a lot more feedback when they're upgrading their firmware. And the obvious one has always been some kind of progress bar to let you know how your firmware is downloading, how far it's got, whether it's stuck, things like that. This was next to impossible because of the way the old UI worked. I mean, I think the best we managed to do was to have the download button changed to have some dots on it, so you knew something was happening. But here we have a lot more. We have more options. We still have our three ways of upgrading our firmware. You can download from a server, either the AREDN server on the internet or a local server if you choose. You can upload from your desktop, or you can sideload it by copying the firmware onto your device in some other way. But so notice the little circular button next to the download firmware. This is to basically update our list of firmware. In the old dialog, I think we have a refresh button for this purpose. It does the same thing, but I'm sort of pointing it out because I don't want to upgrade the firmware on this device as we're demonstrating it, because that would be annoying. But I do want to highlight the sort of feedback we give when you're doing things with this kind of network stuff. So at the bottom, you'll notice there's this little sort of grayed out bar and it says fetch and update. If you keep your eye on that grayed out bar when I click this button, you'll see it quickly, a blue line as it's pulling the firmware information from the server. And then, of course, this is then populated with the currently available firmware. And let's suppose I wanted to pick some new firmware, like the current nightly. As soon as I do that, the button down here becomes active and it will let me fetch and update that firmware, which I'm obviously not going to do. But that's the point where you would then hit that. You would see progress on that bar as it downloaded the firmware, just as you saw progress on the bar when I was getting the firmware that was available, and it would then go off and flash the device. Advanced options here are some of the things you would have found in the old sort of advanced options page on the old firmware. Importantly, for firmware is where to find the firmware. I mean, by default, we're pointing you at the AREDN servers. Obviously, you could point that at your local mesh server or wherever you want it to be. So packages is very similar. Again, we're downloading packages. We are either from a server or from uploading them from your desktop. You can remove packages as well, and you can tell it where to find packages. There's no point in me doing anything here because this is running a custom build. And because I'm running a custom build, there are no packages it can download from the AREDN server because the AREDN server doesn't have anything for it. But the process is similar. You pick what you want. You'll see the progress bar. You install it, and it will give you some feedback about success and what have you. Just popping out of here, I'm highlighting here the current firmware that I'm running, and notice it has a little custom label next to it. So the firmware identifies that what I'm running is a custom build. It's not an AREDN build, and it realizes it's not a nightly build. But if it was running a nightly build or a release build, this banner would either tell you that your firmware was up to date, or it would tell you that your firmware was out of date. And it would give you some concept that your firmware needs to be updated. So rather than having to have the big yellow banner that we sometimes use on our current nodes to tell people to upgrade, the node itself would notice that there was new firmware for it by looking at the place it could download firmware with, be it the AREDN server or your local server, and go, there's new firmware to install, and let you know to do that. We still don't do that for you, but we certainly try to make it more obvious to you that something needs to happen. So that's a sort of basic configuration and update process. Then we get into our network configuration. So a lot of the time, no one really needs to do anything with this, but you may want to enable access to your WAN network, or to have more hosts on your LAN, for example. And this is, of course, where you would do that. I have 13 hosts on my LAN, but I could change it to different configurations, or I could completely disable it. I have my WAN enabled and I'm using DHCP, but I could decide that I want to configure it statically. And when I change the option, fields are going to appear to let me actually do that specific feature. And again, this is quite common in all the other dialogues, where we only try to show you what you need to fill in when you need to fill it in, rather than have stuff that is not relevant to what you're trying to do in that moment. But we won't do that. And then there's DNS servers and what have you. And down here we have a few additional options. Again, you would often find these in the advanced options in the current thing. I have this node configured to use a particular VLAN in my house to get to the internet. In this case, it's 111, and that's why I have it set here. Then moving on to the little map. I wanted to try and do something more visual with this software, because people want to know where nodes are. They want to know how nodes connect. We now have the beginnings of a worldwide map using the super nodes, and that's where we point our map by default. So if we click into here, we actually get some our information about our latitude, our longitude, and it shows you center of the map is that spot, right? But when you're starting out, you might be wanting to configure your node. So you could, for example, say, well, actually, my node's over here. So if I just take this map and drag it around and put that in the center, it will actually set the longitude and latitude as I move it around. And it'll also recalculate the grid square. So if you keep moving this around, you'll see the grid square change as the longitude and latitude change. You can also do it the other way. You can also go, well, actually, I'm going to my latitude is 36. I have no idea where 36 is, but if you hit that, the map itself will then zoom to that point. Oh, apparently it's in the ocean. Okay, less useful. And everything else will recalculate to let you, to basically keep all these fields consistent. And similarly, you can type in the grid square. It will adjust everything else. So you can basically set your location however makes sense to you. Advanced options here it lets you change the map and put a different map URL in if you wanted to do that. But we start by giving you the AREDN map, but you can of course point it to any map server that you have on your local mesh. So that's a sort of basic configuration of the node. Now let me switch to a different node of mine to talk a little bit about the right-hand side, because the right-hand side is more to do with radios, and my main node in my house is not a radio node, it's a virtual machine. So a lot of that information simply isn't there. So let me just switch over to a node that's on my roof. So this node is on my roof. It connects to a node across town. And as you can see from on the right-hand side, it's a Ubiquiti rocket. It's using a particular antenna. And of course, we can now go into this section and change all these options too. And there's a lot more options here, of course, because a lot more configurable. We'll start by the way this talks about radios, the way this manages radios is slightly different from how we currently do it. So rather than having in our current UI, we basically have three purposes. You can be a mesh, and then might be connecting to your wireless internet, or you might be providing wireless to a wireless hotspot. These are things you can configure. Here we have a radio, usually one, sometimes two, and you basically tell it what you can do with it. So in my case, my radio is a mesh. But if I go in here, I can decide that the radio could also be the LAN hotspot. It can be a WAN client. So if I were to pick something different, like the LAN hotspot, all my configuration options will change to let me configure that particular set of options. Similarly, if I wanted to connect to as a WAN client, so I'm connecting to a wireless network to talk to the internet, the options will change to support that. And of course, I can just turn them off if I wanted to. But I'll go back to being a mesh because that's what I want it to be. And then the configuration here is much the same that you might expect. You can pick the channel, you can pick the channel width, you can set the power, you can change the SSID as much as you would want, and then you can change various minimum and maximum distances for allowing nodes to connect and what have you. If you have a device with two radios, you'll get two sets of this information, and you'll be able to set up this information for each different radio. So you might have your 2 gig radio being the mesh and your 5 gig radio being a LAN hotspot, for example, and you can configure all this stuff separately. The only thing you can't do is that you can't have two radios fulfilling the same function, just the same as you can't at the moment. Each one has to have an independent function. The only thing they can both do at the same time is be off. So then moving down a little bit, I'm going to switch back to my other node because it has more interesting information in there. So my main node is used for basically everything in my house and everything that's connected to AREDN. It has my mesh phone connected to it. It has a camera on the roof connected to it, and various other things. And this is where you would set up your reservations and get your active leases and stuff. So the system here is basically the same as it was in our old UI. You have your reservation sections where you can choose an IP for these things and set the MAC address and give it a name. It probably should be, if you're making it propagate across the network, it should be a unique name. We don't enforce that, but you're encouraged to do that. You can, of course, type them in, or you can add them from the list of leases that you're currently issuing on your network. So if you wanted to add something, you would just hit the little plus button here, and a new box is going to appear, as you can see. Wants a host name, wants a MAC address. And notice how here the boxes are highlighted in red. And that means that these fields are incorrectly filled out. I mean, they're blank right now, and that's not okay. Unless you put valid information into these fields, this field is not going to be saved. So we try to give the user feedback on what is okay. I mean, help will obviously tell you what you need to do as well, but we try to give a user the information about the fact that whatever they've typed into that box is not appropriate, and it's going to that those fields are going to remain red bordered until they get it right. That stops us sending poor information to our nodes and potentially like corrupting our configurations by taking information that's just not okay. So that's basically reservations. And you can pick for what available IP addresses you have, just like you might like on our current system. The actual the interaction here is basically the same. It's just the visuals are slightly improved. Like, let me pop back to my radio node and talk about the center section for a little while. So the center section of the main page is basically telling you about like your services and your connections that this node has. So it's what can this node do and what is it connected to? So at the top is a section that doesn't appear unless you're the admin, and that's basically lets you configure your internal services, of which there are quite a few these days. So for example, do you want to be part of the cloud mesh? Do you want to be able to use the supernodes? Do you want to support the iPerf3 server? Do you want to do remote logging? And so all these kind of configuration stuff is placed here to make it easy for someone to like do basic internal configurations. And again, a lot of this stuff just doesn't appear unless you need it to. So for example, you notice that the Watchdogs service is not enabled. But if I do enable it, I'll get a few more fields to let me determine what address I need to monitor. Maybe I need to reboot the node once a day, stuff like that. Things the Watchdog currently supports, but it makes it much more accessible, a little less hidden. In my node, I've turned off I've turned off one access to the web, but I could simply hit that switch there and turn that on, and I could set up remote logging if I want information from this device to be like sent to a remote log server. In our local mesh node area, we use a remote server called Graylog, and a lot of our sort of main nodes will send their data to that, so it can be accumulated in one place. And this is where you would configure that. This time I'm going to leave the WAN web turned on just so we can see this pending change at the top again. And this time I'm going to hit, just for curiosity's sake, I'm going to hit the commit button. Now it's going to go and make that change to the system. And once it's done, it'll remove the dialog to let me know that change has been committed to the system. Moving down a little, I have no local devices plugged into this node because it's on the roof and not doing anything very much. No local services. This node is not providing any services to anybody. But it does let me know what connections I have. And the local node connections here are the DTD connections. They are the wired connections to other nodes in my house. The top two you see here are my sort of like production nodes, the ones that I use in our local mesh. And then the few underneath it are various test nodes that I have running for like debugging code and stuff. But they're just all on my network. And as you would expect, there are the LQ and NLQ for these nodes is 100, and there are no errors. I mean, it's a piece of wire between two nodes. It's kind of what you would hope for. However, you also see one other node, and that's my neighborhood nodes. And a neighborhood node is basically a connection to a node that isn't at your site. In this case, this is the connection to a chap called Chris, who's about, well, I can see he's 1.9 miles away because it says that there, just across town from me. And here it gives me a little basic information about what's going on. I'm getting 100, which is great. I'm going to signal strength of 39 in one direction, 37 in the other direction. 1% errors. I mean, that's fine. An average transmission rate of 18.7 megabits, which is, is what the radios are reporting to us. And this is the kind of information that we've provided in the current UI, but we wanted to provide a lot more information in the new UI. So if we go into if we click on this thing, you'll notice how it highlights. Then we pull up a lot more information about the node itself. So now we can see that, it's an RF node, what the MAC address is, what the IP address is, what hardware he's running on his end, what firmware he's running on his end, exactly where he is. And these a lot of the information is actionable, so you can click on it. It will take you to maps and what have you. It tells us what our ETX is. And then we get to some other information that, again, we've always had that we haven't really exposed very well. Like it tells me what the ping time is across town. It's telling me it's 10.6. It's not brilliant, but it's certainly not like a second where you'd start to worry that something was happening. It's telling me that the success is 100%. So my connection is good, and then it gives me some idea of how much traffic is actually going across this link. 5.5 packets per second. Not a super heavily used link. But it gives me some concept of how much it's in use. Then we see our SNRs again, and now we start to get into some of this sort of like more interesting information, like how many transmissions are failing, like basically how many times does the transmission have to be, is it not happening, and how many times do I have to retransmit stuff? How much failure am I seeing on this link? And these numbers are pretty good, but sometimes you can see over 100% for some of these numbers when things are failing and failing and failing again. And obviously those kind of connections are not very good. Lets me know the state of my link. It's routing, which means it's actually actively being used for something. And then it lets me know how many routes are going across this link. And a route basically is a connection to something or some device or some IP address on the other end. So it's saying that there's some things on the other end of this link, but not a huge number. 19 is a modest number of devices. This is not a major link in our network. And then at the bottom there's a little graph. So we've always had this information, but it is even available, but it's sort of not well exposed. So now we can actually look at, I think it's the last hour and a half of how this link has performed. We get an idea of what the noise floor has been. We get an idea of what the signal has been, and we can, so you can get some notion if you're trying to look at the performance of a link, you're trying to debug stuff about how that link has been performing over time. Again, that kind of information that we've had, but have no real place to put it before now. So if you had lots of nodes, you'd have lots of graphs. You'd be able to look at this information for different connections and get some concept of what's working, what isn't, and when it's failing, some idea of what's failing. Perhaps you'll see this may look great, but you'll see massive transmission failures, for example. So it starts to give you a lot more information about what's going on and gives you a place to start looking at how to debug stuff. The other thing you can do on this page is you can decide to just say this node is going to be blocked. So this little dialog here lets you say that it has three options. The default option is whatever the system thinks should happen, which you'll see in the middle there. But you can also say that I will never block this node. I don't care how bad it is. I don't care how terrible it is. I don't care how many retransmissions it has. I always want this connection to be available. And then you can just say that, no, never. I just don't want to talk to this guy. I mean, he just for whatever reason, this connection shouldn't be used. There are better things, better ways to connect to this guy. I know best. Let's just not use this. So that gives some of the basics information about this sort of connection information that we're trying to provide to people with the new UI, showing people the state of connections and stuff. Also, notice a little icon there. We try to use more visual cues about what's going on. That little icon is a wireless icon to let you know that this is in fact an RF link. If I pop back to my other node, you'll see there are other icons in my neighbors. I have little globes when it tells you that this is a tunnel. I have a little arrow here, and in my case, that's letting me know that that's an X link, which is a non-AREDN radio link to somewhere else. And similarly, I can go into these nodes and have information about these nodes. Although we have more information about radio nodes than we have about non-radio nodes. Notice here that this is much more active route. It has 566 routes, much more actively used by our network. Also note on this node is because it's my main node. This is the node that hosts my services. And I have a few services that I make available to people. I have a map, I have a camera. I let people know what my phone is, and I have an NTP server. And notice again, we're trying to make this a little bit more visually interesting and also visually sort of obvious by allowing you to include little icons next to things. So a little map icon next to the map, a little time icon next to the NTP server, a camera next to the camera, and a phone next to the phone. If we go into this, because this is where we would define our services, we have our services page, and this is where we get to define that kind of thing and also create new ones. So this looks very similar to our current way of defining services. It certainly contains all the same information, but we wanted to try and make it easier for people to create things and create them correctly. So if you notice at the top, it says add services, there's this thing that says generic URL, and because that's often what you want to add. But if you click on it, you get options. And here we've tried to gather a bunch of prototypes for the kinds of things people want to do. And we could totally expand this list by adding more and more things, that's the kinds of things people want to do. But this was our first cut at it. So for example, there's a bunch of cameras. A lot of people use Ubiquiti cameras, for example. So if you select the Ubiquiti camera thing and you hit the plus sign here, what you get added at the top is a new entry specifically set up for how a Ubiquiti camera needs to be formatted, with the correct URL for the snapshot image, the right port, and then a default name, admittedly not a very exciting default name. We're telling it it's a camera, and then our default URL, because we don't actually know where it's going to be, but you get to click on that and then choose something else. But here you can decide that, well, obviously all this is changed. Maybe it's actually the URL should be that. And maybe it's not a camera. Maybe you want to tell it it's something else. Maybe you want to say that, well, actually, it looks like a camera, but it's actually going to be a video. So you could change the type to video, and that would change the icons that people would see when they browse the web or they visit your node, and give you a lot more sort of information about what these services are, what you can do with them, and things like that. You can also do the other things you might expect when setting up node services. You can create your host aliases the same way you would before. Again, you just click the plus, pick whatever you need to pick here, type in the name just as you were before, and then you can also do your port forwarding that you might want to do. Often comes in if you're trying to if you're using NAT LAN setup, but you can also forward ports from your WAN to use services locally. Again, just like you can now, but a little bit more visually interesting, and also with a lot more sort of verification, because here, of course, it's letting you know that you haven't set a port, you haven't set a port or a range, you haven't enabled it, but it lets you, so it gives you feedback that there's still stuff to be done and it's not correct, and therefore, hopefully, when you will set it up more correctly, and things will work a lot easier for you. So that's node services. So at this point, what else do we need to talk about? A bunch of stuff. We'll talk about tunnels, and this is my tunnel server. So there's actually quite a lot of tunnels here. We have in the summary panel on the right, you'll see that it breaks out WireGuard tunnels and legacy tunnels, and it lets me know how many client tunnels I have and how many server tunnels I have, how many I've created and how many are actually active. And apparently, nobody uses my server tunnels anymore. Apparently. But if we go into here, we get a more unified way of creating these tunnels. We try to use some color and some visuals to sort of call them out, to let people know that they're different. But we wanted to try and solve a few problems with the new tunnel setup. One is, try and make it easy to create tunnels. You can just pick the kind of tunnel you want, hit the plus sign, it will create a new entry for you. Try and populate as much stuff as it can. Lets you delete tunnels, which, in some cases, you're not actually allowed to delete tunnels in AREDN. They just stay there forever. The best you can do is sort of change the entries to nothing or whatever. But now you can delete tunnels. Don't have to worry about that anymore. You can set the weights on each individual tunnel, so you can decide that some tunnels you want to use are you really don't want to use them unless you have to, so you can give them a higher weight, which means they don't get used unless you really need to. All tunnels now can have notes. Only certain tunnels before could have notes, but notes seem like a really useful way of, like, basically keeping information about this tunnel. So when you come back and you go, well, what the heck is this? You have more data about them. Every tunnel can be enabled or disabled. You'll notice these little switches on the right. When they're disabled, you'll see that they're red. And when they're enabled, they're either gray or green. If they're gray, it means it's enabled, but no one's connected. Or if green, it means it's in use. So let me try. Is this the right one? Nah, let's do a legacy server tunnel. So if you create a legacy server tunnel, now the only thing you really need to do is tell it the name that you want of the person that you're going to connect, the node you're going to connect to. We give you a default password. You can change this. You can type something else in, but we give you a default password because why not? The WireGuard tunnels already have default passwords because they're encryption keys. So we brought that concept over here. And it just makes it simple. So, I could decide that the node name is, 00900, which is not a very good node name, but that's fine. And then to get this information, I have a little clipboard icon. If I just click on that, it'll open up a page which has all the information I need for this tunnel, and I can then copy and paste that information and send it to the recipient by whatever mechanism makes most sense. So we used to open up a mail window, but a lot of people just didn't use that. Now we just open up something that can just copy and paste it, and it's super simple. The only thing you really need to change about tunnels might be the name of your tunnel server, but there's again advanced options at the bottom here to let you change your tunnel network address, lets you set a default weight on your tunnels. Perhaps you want all your tunnels to always be, like, by default really unused, but one is the default. But any tunnel can override that. Let me pop to a slightly different node just to show Ethernet ports and X-links. So above the tunnel section, we have an Ethernet ports and X-links. So on certain devices, you can configure purpose of what ports are for. Certain VMs, you can do this. HAP AC2, HAP AC3 is a very popular device for doing this. There are others as well. So we go into here, we get information about what ports we have and what they're being used for. We also wanted to let people know if these ports are actually being used. So you'll notice at the top I have 4 Ethernet ports on this VM. 3 of them are currently plugged in to cables, and you see that because they're highlighted in green, and this gives you an indication of what ports are actually active now, rather than just what ports are available. Otherwise, you can just pick, by picking the relevant checkboxes, you can decide which ports are used for what. So I could decide that my Ethernet 1 port is also going to be a LAN port, and I would just pick that, and then that would then become a LAN port. Similarly, I could decide I have no LAN ports, I could just turn them all off. I mean, it can be configured however makes sense for your particular device. And then below that we have the X links, and these are the additional, if you like, VLANs which we use to connect between nodes at different sites, but over non-AREDN radios. The configuration there is exactly how it was in the old UI. Again, the UI is just is slightly cleaned up. So that's the Ethernet port configuration. So that's, I think, a basic outline of everything when it comes to configuring your node, be it services, tunnels, links, radios, networks, location, time, all that kind of stuff. But there's still more to it than that. We want, one of the things we wanted to bring to this version of the UI was better tooling. So on the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see a little. Let me go to a radio, which has more interesting tools. On the radio one, there's more interesting tools because you can do various more things. So previously, we've had the kind of tools we've had are the Wi-Fi scanner, and the Wi-Fi signal. Those are basically where you would go and see what devices you could see in your area. So if I go in here, I get to my Wi-Fi scanner. I haven't done a scan, but if I hit rescan, it's now going to go out and do a scan and see what AREDN and other nodes it can detect. So again, this is very similar to what we currently have. Again, the UI is just slightly cleaned up. The scanner will remember the last scan you did, let you know when it was last done, and it will only generate a new scan when you ask it to. So it means coming to this page is not a long process if you just need to nip back here and look about what you saw last time you did this. So as you can see, various nodes. Some of these are probably my test nodes in my basement, but you can see my node. You can see the node I'm connected to across town. So that's very similar to how it was. We also reworked the Wi-Fi signal. This is the UI you might use if you're trying to align your antenna to point to like the best AREDN source. So here, conceptually, it's much the same. You basically have a graph showing you the signal you're getting from whatever you're pointing at. But on the left, we have a simple indication of how well you're doing or how badly you've done. So the green bar is where you currently are. The gray bar, the best signal you've ever seen. The red bar, the worst signal you've ever seen. So we could actually, right at the moment it's just doing average, but we could pick the actual node across town we want to do. So then we'll actually start reporting information for that particular connection. So you can imagine as you're moving your node around, just like before, the graph will change to indicate what's going on, but you have this sort of more immediate visual representation on your left to tell you immediately what's going on and how well it's going, rather than trying to look at the graph to understand what's going on. We still have the same sound controls we had before, so you can still use this sort of like put a laptop on the ground and listen as you move as your antenna around. That's still the same as it ever was. So this is just the new design for the signal locator stuff. Then we wanted to bring some new tools into the mix. So ping, for example. Often people will log into a node because they want to see the ping time between them and some other location on the mesh. We wanted to make a tool to make that easy. So in this case, by default, the ping will start at the source address, which is me, but I can pick a node from any of the nodes I have on my local mesh and see what the ping time is. So let's pick something which is hopefully not down. So let's pick this guy, and then I will just hit go, and it will actually set off run a ping on our node to ping the other node, wherever that may be on the network. And then so that's a very simple sort of tool for just checking connectivity to things. Similarly, we have a trace route. Again, people sometimes want to understand how one node is connected to another. So here again, I could just pick some random node. I'll say I pick that one, and then I could hit go, and it will actually run a trace route across the network, and it will show you the path that the packets are taking from your source node to your target node. In this case, all these links are active. So if you decide you really want to look at one of the nodes on the way, you can just click on that, and it actually navigates to that node, and you can look at the status of that node, just like you're navigating any other way. Then we have the iPerf tool. So iPerf has been a feature in the AREDN software for a while. I mean, you could always go onto the command line and do it, but that was always somewhat fiddly. And then a while ago, we put in a sort of an API version to do it, where if you typed in a particular URL, you could generate an iPerf from your node to that node. And again, we wanted to try and bring this tooling to make it much more accessible, much easier to use. So here, the layout is much the same. I can pick. I'm starting from my node, and I can pick another node. Where shall I pick? I will pick. I don't know. Let's pick that guy. And then I can go, and it will actually set off an iPerf from me to them, and it will report what the actual bandwidth is between those 2 points. So in iPerf's case, so that gives me an idea of what the bandwidth is between my node and that node, which I think is over in sort of like Livermore Pleasanton area. Notice also, this was true on all the other tools as well, but notice there's this little reverser arrow on the right side. So if I click that, you'll notice these two hosts will switch around. And now I can just hit it again, and I'll actually do the test, but in the other direction. So we'll actually run the iPerf in the opposite direction, so I can measure the bandwidth in the opposite direction if I want to. Often the numbers it comes up with are very different. It just depends on radio circumstances and what have you. And I don't have to start the connection from here. I could pick a different place on the network. So I could pick this place on the network, and I could actually then do an iPerf between these two nodes, which are two completely separate nodes out on the network, and it will find out what the bandwidth between those 2 points is. Once this software is deployed, that option becomes available for all the tooling. All the tools will let you do arbitrary tests between any two nodes. And some of the tooling, like the ping test, for example, will let you do a test between a node and something on the internet, assuming your mesh is connected to the internet, because it's just a ping test. iPerf requires AREDN at both ends, because we have to run special code at both ends to make this happen. And then the final tool is our support data. So at the bottom of the admin page in our current UI, there's a button that you click to download support data. And that's always been there. The data that it generates is super, super useful, particularly when you're debugging nodes or debugging new software or working out how to make new hardware work. All this does is bring that process to a more centralized point where you can say, if you say, oh, send me some support data, you can always go here, hit support data, and off it will go and download support data for you. So what else? So that gives you a basic overview of the sort of tooling and the configuration stuff of the node. But there's a few more pieces to go over still. And obviously the one I haven't talked about at all is the traditional view of the mesh. I mean, right now we have a mesh view. It lists all the nodes, all the services, and everything you can see. So you notice on one of the things on the left-hand side here is a mesh icon. So we click on that, we'll actually go to our mesh page. And here we wanted to try and make it somewhat simpler, but also more informative. So firstly, if I quickly scroll down, you notice that there are nodes and they're sort of grouped together in these colored boxes. And what we're trying to do here is to give you, I don't know, expectation management, perhaps. We're trying to give you an idea of how likely it is you're going to be able to get a good connection to those nodes and how fast those connections are going to be based on fundamentally how good the connection between you and them is. So, our worst category is improbable, which basically means these nodes are a long way away. There's a lot of packet loss. The chances of you not making a good connection to them are not great. Whilst at the top, excellent. That's going to be your local nodes, things, probably your neighbors, things with really good connections in your local area. And then, of course, there's everything in between. We still have the search as we had before. So, for example, I can decide to look for all the cameras, and and it will basically filter the page and then reduce it to the available cameras. And I could click on these links to go and navigate to the cameras or whatever it may be. Notice again, in my case, my camera has a little camera icon next to it. Again, we try to bring some of this visual information to this screen so that it's easier to digest. So you can be looking through and say, oh, that's a camera because there's a camera icon on it, rather than just a sort of generic link, as you can see for other things. A little bit of help to try and help you understand this. Most people will never need this, but when you're starting out, it might be useful to understand what it is that you're looking at. And what it is that this page is trying to convey. And of course, this page no longer has to contain a lot of that information about NLQs and quality and stuff, because that information now exists on the main page. This sort of just becomes your main navigation page. And I suspect a lot of the time, you'll simply be using your local navigation page to go places, and you'll very rarely be using navigation pages on remote nodes because that information is on the front page now. Couple other icons we have down here. We have a cloud-looking mesh node. So if I click on that, that will just take me to my local supernode, which is running the old software, our old mesh page. That icon will appear if you're on a supernode connected network and the supernode is available to you. Otherwise, the icon simply won't be there, and you won't care about it. Eventually, hopefully, that supernode will run this software, and therefore will have this very pleasing view to it. The final one is a map icon. So assuming your node can talk to a map, assuming you can talk to either the global map or you've configured it to talk to a local map, when you hit this, it's going to basically pull up the map server, put your node front and center, and then give you an idea of where you are and how you're connected to stuff. So if you're somebody else's node and you did that, it would pull up the map with where their node is on the map in general. So it gives you an integration into sort of map information about how your local mesh is configured and working, and what you can see from there. And although we, by default, point it to the generic map, there's absolutely no reason why it can't port to your local map server or your personal map server. It's all completely configurable, so you can totally do that. It's not locked down to our stuff in any way. And at that point, I think I basically covered pretty much all there is. I mean, obviously, you can log out, you can reboot, you can get some help. I guess there's one other thing that doesn't come up much, but of course comes up at least once whenever you're installing a node, and that's the experience of installing a node. Right now, when you install a node, you basically get given the sort of default page, and then the documentation tries to lead you through what you need to do and what you don't need to do. In future, we want to have something simple so that particularly when someone's starting out, installs the software, it boots up, what do they see? They want to see the simplest information that they can possibly have about where to go from here, what they need to do, just to get them started. So rather than have a version of our sort of general configuration page, we have a completely unique sort of welcome to AREDN page where you type your node in, it tells you what you need to do, tells you need to have a call sign in it, gets you to put a password in, and then you're off to the races, right? That's the basic information you need to get your node working, and it should be super simple for people to get started. Finally, I'll do this to my main node, which might annoy people, but I'll do that. No, actually, I'll do it to this node because that's not going to annoy anybody. I'll just quickly do the reboot screen, just because why not? Again, we started to make on our old UI, we started to do better with indicating what's actually going on when you reboot it, how long it will take. We just wanted to make this a slightly cleaner version of this for the new UI. You get a similar screen like this when you're updating the firmware. It will basically tell you I'm updating the firmware, how long it will take. I'll reconnect when I'm done. But again, a sort of very simple, very clean, very, very visible process so people know what's going on. And I think, oh, there we go. VMs don't take long to reboot. I think that's basically it. I think I've pretty much covered everything. I mean, I know I've covered it at a fairly high level of detail, low level of detail. Anyway, not super in depth, but at least I hope enough to give people an idea of what's going on. It is very different. It is a lot of information, particularly on the front page. But I think having all that information for people where they can see it without having to dig for it is really beneficial to being able to use this stuff.
So Tim, when can we expect it in a nightly build? Ballpark.
So that's a good question. I mean, this month, I guess. I'd like to see it in a nightly build sometime in August. We've been working on this for a while, so this is not new in any way. This project started. When was the eclipse? That's when this started. So that should give you an idea of how long this has been going on. So, and I have a bank of like 30 different radios in my basement that I test stuff on. It works on all of those. I mean, a couple of other people have been prodding it for me just to like give me feedback and mostly debugging information, try to make it better. So whilst I'm sure once this goes into nightly, there will be bugs. Um, I feel that when it does go out, and hopefully we'll get it out in August, it should be fairly solid for people to use. And I should point out that at this point, the old UI is still in there. You can go and use the old UI in parallel with this. It's completely there, and that will remain at least until this is solid enough that everybody trusts it. Because I don't want to I don't want to screw anybody else's tunnel configuration up or anything like that, right? I mean, whilst this becomes solid. So yes, the old UI remains for the moment.
Thank you, Tim. I think people will enjoy this. I think you mentioned you think it's feature complete.
It should be feature complete. Yeah, I mean, my list is empty. I mean, from this point onwards, it should become a point of, let's get this solid. Let's get the tweaks that we need to do. Let's get some feedback and things change that make sense. And then, let's work out what else we need to do with it. Because I think we should we should be in a place where the construction of this is very modular. Adding things to it is very easy. Changing things is very easy. And so it should be fairly easy to start to add features that people have always wanted and haven't really been able to do. One thing I should probably say, because this looks very visually complicated, I suppose, it's really visually, so from a bandwidth perspective, it's really tiny. So a typical sort of main page is about 3.5K compressed. So this is important to me because this has to work, and it has to work on potentially slow links, and it can't be like, you can't be shipping 200, 300K UIs across a link like that. It has to be tiny. So UI here is about 3.5K. It's designed to reuse as much as possible. It will, if you're running a node that has the resource it wants, it'll get it from your local node. It won't go across the network for it. So it's as compact and as fast and as low bandwidth as I could think of making it, because I think performance is important on this kind of stuff.
Excellent. Well, thanks for the presentation, Tim, and we'll look forward in the UI or in the new look for the UI in the new nightly builds. How's that? In the nightly builds.
And I look forward to feedback.
Very good.